Imagine waking up to headlines saying the U.S. president just threatened military action against Nigeria, not for oil, not for politics, but for faith. And just hours later, Barack Obama steps on stage, trying to make light of the chaos, only to humiliate himself in front of millions. What's going on here? Why is Trump issuing fatal warnings? And why does Obama still believe people are listening? Today, we'll unpack it all, from the persecution of Christians in Nigeria to the breakdown of U.S. leadership, the global ripple effects, and the cultural unraveling happening right before our eyes. Let's start with what set everything in motion. President Trump posted on Truth Social, and if you've been following him there, you know he doesn't mince words. This time, though, it wasn't just bold. It was stark. He said that if Nigeria continues to allow Christians to be killed, the United States would immediately stop all aid. And then he went further. He said we may very well go into that country, quote, guns blazing. He instructed the Department of War to prepare for possible action. He told the Nigerian government they better move fast. Now, whether you support Trump or not, that's a statement that stops you cold. Because it's rare, vanishingly rare, for an American president to publicly threaten military intervention over religious persecution. We've seen it for terrorism, for weapons of mass destruction, for geopolitical chess games. But for faith, for the systematic killing of believers, that's new territory. And it raises a question we should all be asking ourselves. What triggered this? The answer isn't pretty. For years now, Christians in Nigeria have faced horrific violence. We're talking about entire villages burned to the ground, churches attacked during Sunday services, families massacred in their homes. The numbers are staggering. Estimates run into the thousands of deaths annually. Some organizations, and I want to be careful here because the exact figures vary, some say between 5,000 and 10,000 Christians are killed each year in that region. Others say it's even higher. There's a group called Open Doors International. They track religious persecution worldwide. And every year, they publish a list of the most dangerous places on earth to be a Christian. The top spots? North Korea, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, Nigeria, ranks disturbingly high on that list too. What these places have in common isn't poverty. It's not lack of education. It's something darker. It's either complete chaos where armed groups terrorize with impunity or total control, where authoritarian regimes crush anyone who doesn't conform. Now here's where it gets interesting, or frustrating, depending on how you look at it. During his first term, President Trump designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern because of this violence. That designation isn't symbolic. It triggers a set of diplomatic and economic consequences. It puts pressure on governments to act. And you know what? It actually worked. Reports showed that the killings slowed down. Not stopped, but slowed. The international attention mattered. Then came the Biden administration. And one of the first things they did, they removed that designation. They claimed the violence wasn't really about religion. They said it was about land disputes, about climate change driving farmers and herders into conflict. They framed it as an economic issue, not a moral one. Let that sink in for a second. Thousands of people are being killed because of their faith, and the official response was to say, no, it's about the weather. Now, I'm not here to tell you climate change isn't real or doesn't matter, but when you're trying to explain away a genocide, and some experts do use that word by pointing to rainfall patterns, you've lost the plot. You've replaced moral clarity with bureaucratic cowardice. And that's what Trump was calling out. Not the complexity of the situation, but the refusal to name it for what it is. So why does Nigeria matter? Why should we, sitting comfortably in our homes here in America, care about what's happening half a world away? Because silence is consent. Because when we ignore atrocities, we become complicit in them. And because the same forces that drive persecution abroad, fear, tribalism, the urge to dominate, exist here too. Maybe they're quieter, maybe they're dressed up in nicer language, but they're here. Open Doors identifies two main drivers of persecution: chaos and control. Chaos is what happens when governments collapse, when terror groups fill the vacuum, when organized crime runs wild. Somalia, Yemen, these are places where no one's really in charge, and the most violent voices rise to the top. Control, on the other hand, is what happens when someone is very much in charge. When a regime decides that unity means uniformity, that disagreement is treason, that faith must bow to the state. Think about that second one for a moment. Control, authoritarianism, the pressure to conform or be crushed. Does any of that sound familiar? I'm not saying we're living under a dictatorship, but I am saying we've seen, in recent years, a growing intolerance for dissent, a willingness to silence voices, to deplatform, to cancel, not with violence, thank God, but with social and economic pressure, with reputation destruction, with the quiet message that if you don't fall in line, you'll pay the price. It's not the same as Nigeria, not even close, but it's on the same spectrum. And once you start down that road, it's hard to turn back. Now, here's something I didn't expect, and maybe you didn't either. Nicki Minaj, yes, the rapper, the pop star, someone you wouldn't necessarily associate with political commentary, she came out and publicly supported Trump's post. She wrote on social media that reading his statement made her feel a deep sense of gratitude. She said, "We live in a country where we can freely worship God, and that no group should ever be persecuted for practicing their religion." She said numerous countries around the world are affected by this horror, and it's dangerous to pretend we don't notice. She thanked the president and his team for taking it seriously. And then she said, "God bless every persecuted Christian." I found that remarkable. Not because Nicki Minaj isn't thoughtful, I'm sure she is, but because it's a reminder that truth doesn't belong to any one tribe. Moral clarity can come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it takes someone outside the usual political machinery to say what needs to be said, without all the hedging and calculation. And you know what? That's how it should be. Truth shouldn't be a partisan issue. Defending innocent people shouldn't be a left-right thing. It should just be a human thing. But we've gotten so caught up in picking sides that we've forgotten how to pick principles. Let us shift gears for a moment. Because while all of this is unfolding internationally, there's a crisis brewing right here at home. And it's hitting people where it hurts most in their ability to feed their families. The government shutdown, I've mentioned it countless times, has been dragging on for over a month. And one of the casualties is the SNAP program. I won't go too much into detail since I've already mentioned this in previous videos, but somewhere between 40 and 45 million Americans rely on that program. And because of the shutdown, their benefits didn't come through on time. Think about that. You're a single mom working 2 jobs, or you're a retiree on a fixed income, or you're someone who's hit a rough patch and just needs a little help to get back on your feet. And suddenly the money you were counting on to buy groceries just doesn't show up. Federal judges stepped in and ordered the Trump administration to release emergency funds to cover the gap. And Trump responded by saying his lawyers are looking into it, trying to get clarification, because it's not entirely clear where that money is supposed to come from. There's a legal question here about whether a court can order the executive branch to spend money that Congress hasn't appropriated. It's complicated. But here's what's not complicated. People are hungry. And while Washington argues about procedure, families are lining up at food banks. Now, some people have responded by pointing fingers at billionaires. They say Jeff Bezos and the Walton family are worth hundreds of billions of dollars combined. Their employees are on food stamps. Why don't they just pay people a living wage and solve the problem? And look, I get the frustration. I really do. But there's a fundamental misunderstanding here that we need to clear up. Because when someone says a person is worth, say, $300 billion, they don't mean that person has $300 billion sitting in a bank account. They mean that if you added up the value of all the companies they own, all the real estate, all the investments, that's what it would theoretically be worth. But you can't spend it. It's not liquid. It's tied up in assets that employ people, that generate value, that drive the economy. Could they sell some of those assets and convert them to cash? Sure. But the act of selling would crash the value. And even if they did, it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Because here's the real issue. It's not the CEO's job to manage their employees' personal finances. A company can pay a fair wage, and they should. But if someone's living above their means, buying things they can't afford, making poor financial decisions. No amount of raises will fix that. And yes, there are people who are struggling through no fault of their own. I'm not dismissing that. But there are also people who abuse the system, who never learn financial discipline, who expect someone else to bail them out over and over again. And when we pretend that billionaires can just write a check and solve poverty, we're avoiding the harder conversation about financial literacy, personal responsibility, and the role government plays in either empowering people or keeping them dependent. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the dysfunction is spreading. Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana gave an interview where he compared Congress to kids fighting in the back of a minivan. He said it's not a good look, and he's right. It's embarrassing. The rest of the world is watching, and what they're seeing is a superpower that can't even keep its own government running. And the consequences are real. At major airports across the country, Houston, Boston, New York, flights are being delayed because air traffic controllers are calling out sick. These are people who've been working for over a month without pay. They're stressed, they're exhausted, and some of them have just stopped showing up. The FAA says nearly 13,000 controllers are affected. At some facilities, absence rates are pushing 70 or 80%. That means fewer people managing the skies, which means flights have to be spaced further apart, which means delays, which means a guy trying to get to his daughter's wedding or a woman rushing to see her sick mother in the hospital is stuck in a terminal, helpless, while Congress plays games. And then, just to add insult to injury, 2 planes nearly collided on the tarmac at LaGuardia. One clipped the tail of the other. Nobody was hurt, but it's a warning sign. When you push a system to its breaking point, eventually something breaks. And when it comes to aviation, we can't afford that. The FAA insists it's still safe to fly. And maybe it is, but how long can that last? This is what Senator Kennedy meant. This is the embarrassment. Not just that the government is shut down, but that the people in charge seem more interested in scoring political points than in solving the problem. And the folks paying the price? It's not the politicians. It's the air traffic controller who can't pay rent. It's the family that can't afford groceries. It's you and me, watching the circus and wondering when the adults are going to show up. But here's the thing, and this is important. The longer this goes on, the more dangerous it gets. Not just logistically, morally. Because when people lose faith in institutions, they don't just get cynical, they get desperate. And desperate people make desperate choices. They turn to extremes. They stop believing in the system altogether. And that's when things really start to fall apart. So where does that leave us? Well, while all of this is happening, Barack Obama decided to make a public appearance. He showed up at a rally in Virginia, stumping for a candidate named Abigail Spanberger, and you'd think, given everything we've just talked about, that he'd use the moment to call for unity, to remind people why we're supposed to be better than this, to offer some kind of vision that rises above the noise. But that's not what happened. Instead, he spent his time mocking Trump. He made jokes about AI-generated videos. He talked about gold-plating the Oval Office and building a $300 million ballroom. He tried to paint a picture of a president disconnected from reality, obsessed with spectacle, while the country burns. And the crowd laughed, they applauded, they ate it up. But here's what struck me, and I think you'll feel it too if you really listen to what he was saying. There was no substance. There was no policy. There was no acknowledgement of the real pain people are feeling. It was all performance, all theater, and beneath the humor, you could hear something else, something better. It wasn't the voice of a leader trying to build something. It was the voice of someone trying to tear something down, and not because he had something better to offer, but because he couldn't stand that someone else was in the spotlight. That's not leadership. That's ego. And when you lead with ego, you don't inspire people. You divide them. Now, I want to be fair. Obama's a smart guy. He's charismatic. And there was a time when his message of hope resonated with millions. But something's changed. And I think it started long before Trump came along. It started when the Democratic Party stopped talking about ideas and started talking about identity. When they stopped asking, how do we make life better for everyone? And started asking, How do we make the other side look worse?